My name is Ethan Cole, and for a long time I believed I was my own master, that no one had the right to tell me what to do, that the world was a jungle where only the most ruthless would survive. The truth is, I had become someone I never imagined I could be as a boy. Today, lying in this hospital bed, my chest pierced by a bullet and my skin marked by needles and bandages, I finally understand that all the control I thought I had was nothing more than an illusion. I grew up hearing that a real man doesn't show weakness and that to earn respect you had to make others fear you. They didn't know they were molding a monster. Fear was my language and violence, my access to the false sensation of power. I admired ruthless men, drug dealers who commanded entire blocks with a simple glance, and I wanted to be like them because, in my world, love was a non-existent word and respect was bought with destruction. I didn't believe in God, nor did I believe in destiny. The only thing I truly believed in was money and the power it gave me. I told myself it was all just a business, that each person was responsible for the choices they made, and that I wasn't to blame if someone destroyed their own life using what I sold. Over time, I discovered that this was just a cowardly way of hiding from the truth, because deep down I knew I was destroying lives. The shadows I carried in my conscience followed me, even when I tried to ignore them. They watched me, while I pretended not to see the damage I was causing in other people's lives. And now, with my heart beating slowly, surrounded by machines that make constant noises and doctors who speak softly, trying not to show that they are losing the battle for my life, I need to admit something I never had the courage to admit to anyone. I destroyed families, dreams, and futures, and I did it believing I would never pay for anything. I thought I was invincible, until the day I died. And it was precisely the moment I lost control that I discovered the truth I had always tried to avoid. I know this testimony has already made you think about life, so stay here. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like so this message reaches more people. What comes next is not just a story, it's a warning. When I say I got involved in drug trafficking, people imagine movie scenes. They believe it all started with a momentary decision or an adrenaline rush. But the truth is much more subtle and dangerous than that, because crime doesn't arrive. Offering destruction, it approaches offering seduction. I was only 17 years old when Derek, a guy a few years older and already known in the neighborhood, was the first crack in my conscience. He drove a black Mustang, wore gold chains, and had a smile that made any teenager believe that was the true meaning of freedom. I grew up watching other men be humiliated, working exhausting hours only to have no money left at the end of the month to even pay their overdue bills. And seeing Derek with all that radiance made me believe that I was facing a new path, the only one that would allow me to escape the emotional and financial misery that had always surrounded me. Derek took me to a party in Miami on a hot summer night. The music vibrated in my chest. The lights flashed as if we were in the center of a universe that only existed for those brave enough to cross the line between right and wrong. There was alcohol everywhere, people dancing as if nothing else mattered, and women looking at him with desire and at me with curiosity. And then, as if offering something as simple as handing over a glass of water, Derek placed a small package in my hand and said I could sell it in less than 10 minutes. When I asked how much I would earn, he just smiled and told me to trust him. I left and, exactly as he had predicted, returned in 3 minutes with the money. He looked at me with an approving smile and said that some are born to obey, but others are born to command. At that moment, I was captivated. The money I received that night was more than I could earn working an entire month at any ordinary job. The weight of the bills in my pocket seemed to convey a sense of importance and power I had never experienced. I knew it was wrong, but the voice of conscience was drowned out by the overwhelming sound of my need for validation. Each time I sold something, I felt I was climbing a step toward a life where no one could humiliate me anymore. I didn't see people. I saw opportunities. I didn't see suffering. I saw profit. And the deeper I delved into that world, the more it convinced me that I was finally where I belonged. And this is exactly where I want to ask you, because perhaps you can see something that I didn't see at that moment. Have you ever noticed how evil never arrives looking evil? Comment, I want spiritual discernment. 425 words. First-person narrative, profound, spiritual. There's a specific moment in the life of someone who chooses evil when the soul stops screaming, when the conscience stops fighting, and when the heart develops a shell thick enough to feel nothing anymore. I remember exactly when that happened to me. It wasn't when I earned my first dirty money, nor when I started carrying a gun, nor when I threatened someone for the first time. My spiritual downfall began the instant I handed over the first drug that I knew would destroy an innocent life. Its name was Noah Williams, 15-year-old boy who seemed to have been swallowed by such great pain that his eyes reflected weariness before reflecting youth. I found him behind a convenience store on a nearly unlit street, while the wind carried the strong smell of sea air mixed with accumulated garbage. He was trembling. His sweaty hands searched for something in his pockets, as if he were afraid he wouldn't have enough to pay. His voice was weak, almost a whisper, and when he asked for the package, I felt a slight hesitation within me. For a moment, I saw my reflection in his eyes. I saw the same despair, the same abandonment, the same desire to escape an unbearable reality. It was as if I were looking at a younger version of myself, a version that still believed it had some value. Noah said it was just for that night, that he needed to forget some things, that he just wanted to stop feeling the pain he carried. Instead of seeing a cry for help, I saw only a quick opportunity for profit. I handed over the package, and when his hand touched my money, something inside me broke irreversibly. I should have felt guilt. I should have felt shame. I should have felt anything that proved I still possessed a soul. But the only thing I could feel was a strange metallic taste in my mouth, as if I had just bitten into my own conscience. After that night, I began to look at the teenagers who came to me, not as lives that were being wasted, but as consumers who would guarantee my next car, my next party, my next plunge into the abyss. And silently, evil ceased to be a visitor and became a resident within me. The first sale was not just a crime, it was a surrender. Not of the drug, but of my soul. And the scariest thing is that a short time later, I would discover that that boy would return to haunt me in the place where no one can escape the truth. After that night with Noah, something inside me began to warp. The first time I handed over that drug, I felt an internal fissure, as if a silent blow had pierced my consciousness and opened a door that should never have been touched. At first, I tried to justify it by saying that it wasn't my responsibility what people did with it. I repeated to myself that everyone was an adult, that everyone made their own choices, even when I knew I was lying to myself. The silence I felt whenever I thought about Noah became unsettling. It was as if a shadow was sitting beside me all the time, watching my every step. However, as the money increased, that shadow ceased to bother me and became just a distant presence. Something I easily ignored because ambition had become louder than any inner voice. I came to see overdoses as normal. It was common for someone to pass out at a party, and I would simply turn my back, as if it were part of the game. Once, a boy collapsed on the floor with foam in his mouth, trembling and writhing, while a group of people screamed in despair and tried to call an ambulance. I just watched the scene and told Derek that he needed to get out of there because this could cause trouble. It wasn't fear for the boy's life, it was fear of being caught. And at that moment, I realized how much my heart was rotting. When the car started moving and I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw his body getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely into the darkness of the early morning. The weight of guilt should have fallen on me, but it didn't. And this absence of pain was the most terrifying sign that my soul was dying. Gradually, I stopped seeing people. I only saw transactions. Lives were reduced to numbers. Eyes became statistics. Broken families became just part of the process. When someone said they had lost a child to drugs, I would look away and change the subject because the pain of others no longer mattered. There was no need to feel empathy if you had already learned to turn off your heart. It was as if I had ripped my own humanity out with my own hands. I didn't know it at the time. But while I believed I was in control, something was watching me. And that silent presence would reveal itself the instant my life was ripped from my body. The night it all happened seemed like so many others. The hot Miami air filled the streets with the smell of wet asphalt, and the city seemed to breathe heavily. as if sensing something I didn't yet perceive. I was in an abandoned warehouse near the port, counting the week's money and checking the shipment that would arrive before dawn. Derek was on the phone with a supplier, and I paced back and forth with my gun on my hip, mentally reviewing every detail of the distribution route. At that moment, I felt invincible. I had money, I had respect, I had men obeying my orders. I truly believed I controlled everything. While Derek was talking, I heard the sound of screeching tires outside, a dry noise that cut through the silence with the force of thunder. I looked at him and realized that, for the first time since I'd met him, there was fear on his face. The next sound was even more devastating. Authoritative shouts echoed from outside, followed by the clatter of car doors opening. Bright lights surged into the warehouse through the cracks in the walls, like blades tearing through the darkness. Police officers positioned themselves on all sides, weapons pointed at the entrance. The helicopter appeared above the building, casting a white light that moved slowly like a giant eye scanning every corner looking for us. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear I felt. It was a sickening mix of adrenaline and arrogance. I believed I could escape any situation. Derek looked at me and, without a second thought, ran to the back of the building. I gripped my weapon tightly, and instead of fleeing, I advanced. The door burst open with a kick. Police officers stormed into the warehouse and began yelling at me to drop my weapon. The voices mingled with the sounds of running boots, and a command echoed repeatedly. "Ethan, drop the gun now." I turned to them and for a few seconds hesitated. Maybe I could surrender. Maybe this was my chance to start over. But pride got the better of me. I ran towards the side exit, believing I could escape through the darkness of the harbor. Then I heard the gunshot. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no slow motion. There was no time to think. I just felt a brutal impact, as if a hammer had pierced my chest from the inside. The air left my body, my legs gave way, and the world began to spin. I fell to my knees and heard my own heart slowing down, as if being swallowed by silence. The last thing I saw was the beam of light from the helicopter illuminating my fallen body, and the expression of a policeman who seemed unable to believe what he was seeing. The pain subsided, and in its place, something even more terrifying emerged. A strange feeling of lightness, as if something were detaching itself from my body. Suddenly, the light went out, and, in the next instant, I saw something impossible. When the helicopter's light faded, the pain began to subside as well, and that sensation should have brought me relief. But something inside me knew something was profoundly wrong. I felt as if I were sinking into a deep sleep, a sleep from which I wouldn't be able to awaken, and when I tried to breathe, I realized my chest was no longer moving. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound, and it was in this absolute silence that something extraordinary happened. A strange sensation coursed through my body, as if invisible threads were snapping, releasing something I didn't know existed. I felt the detachment begin at my feet, climb up my legs, cross my chest, and reach my face, as if a part of me was being pulled out of what I had previously believed to be my only reality. It was then that suddenly, I found myself standing. It took me a while to understand what was happening. I was looking at the ground a few meters away, and could clearly see my fallen body, but my vision wasn't coming from my eyes but from a point above them. I observed the scene like someone watching a movie on a giant screen, but the difference was that this motionless body, surrounded by paramedics, was the body I had occupied for all the years of my life. I tried to breathe, but there was no air. I tried to blink, but my eyes didn't react because I was no longer inside them. A nurse placed her hands on my chest, pressing and repeating instructions that I could hear clearly, and yet her touches produced no sensation in me. It was as if I had been disconnected from the physical world, and only a floating consciousness remained, weightless, bodiless, formless. The scene below looked chaotic. Blood was spilling on the floor. Paramedics were shouting codes and medical instructions. A policeman was holding a radio with a trembling voice, urgently requesting an ambulance and informing them that I was unresponsive. I heard one of them say that I was losing vital signs, And when I looked back at my body, I realized it was no longer me, just an abandoned structure, like a house that no longer shelters anyone. I tried to touch the paramedics, tried to grab one of their arms, but my hand passed through everything. The voice I tried to utter found no echo because I no longer had lungs, I no longer had vocal cords, I no longer possessed anything that belonged to the material world. Suddenly, all sound stopped. There was no transition, no gradual reduction, just complete and absolute silence. The helicopter's light faded into the distance, dissolving like a faded memory, and something began to pull me back, as if an invisible force wanted to take me to a place where no human voice could reach me. I tried to resist, but there was no control left. I was being carried away. That's how I understood for the first time that I was no longer alive. As that invisible force pulled me back, I desperately tried to understand where I was going. There were no more sirens, voices, radio noise, nothing of the world I knew. There was only absolute silence, a silence so dense it seemed to fill everything around me. I tried at least to think of retreating, but it was impossible. I was being led to a place I didn't choose, as if I were sliding inside a deep tunnel made of living darkness. It wasn't the darkness we see when we turn off a room light. It was a kind of darkness that seemed to possess consciousness, as if it were happy to receive me. The more I was pushed into that void, the more I felt something inside me begin to suffocate. I felt fear, not that common fear, but an existential terror, as if I were moving away not from the world but from the very origin of life. My soul seemed to know that I was crossing an invisible border between what we know as life and what exists after it. Just when I began to believe I would be swallowed by that darkness forever, something completely opposite happened. A light appeared in the distance, but it wasn't an ordinary light. It didn't have a specific point of origin and seemed to be alive. The light grew and drew closer, yet it didn't hurt my eyes. The closer it got, the more I felt that light piercing through who I was, as if it could see all my thoughts, all my intentions, all my memories. There was no escaping it, because it didn't just illuminate what was around me, it illuminated the truth within me. That's when I realized that that light wasn't just light, it was a presence. The instant that presence enveloped me, the darkness retreated on its own, as if it hadn't been allowed to approach. The feeling that overwhelmed me wasn't fear, but shame. I wasn't facing a stranger. Without anyone saying their name, I knew exactly who was there. Jesus. Not like the religious image I had ignored all my life, but like someone as real as the air I once breathed. He wasn't a judge with a stern face, nor a savior bearing a pity. He was a presence of absolute purity. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me. And in that look, without the need for questions or explanations, I saw everything I had done, everything I had destroyed, everything I had become. I tried to speak, I tried to justify, I tried to argue, but no words came out. It was as if, faced with the truth, the lie lost oxygen. Jesus wasn't accusing me, I was condemning myself. And it was in that silence that I understood something I never imagined I would understand. Judgment doesn't happen when God points out our mistakes, but when we are finally able to see the evil we chose to cultivate. The light remained motionless before me, and then, without uttering a sound, something was shown. The light emanating from him not only illuminated the place where I was, but exposed every hidden corner within me, and there was no way to look away or pretend that something didn't exist. The presence of Jesus did not bring condemnation, but it brought truth, and truth has a weight that cannot be explained with human words. Suddenly, images began to appear around me, not as ordinary memories, but as experiences that I relived intensely. I saw faces, heard voices, and felt emotions that were not mine, but that I had provoked. I saw Noah, the 15-year-old boy to whom I gave that drug, sitting in a dark room, his face swollen from crying and a needle in his hands, as if he were about to give up on everything. I saw the moment he collapsed, and his breath completely ceased. I didn't just watch the scene. I felt his pain, the despair, the abandonment and the emptiness that filled that boy's heart. I felt his mother's pain as she found him and pleaded for a life that I had helped to end. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, other images surfaced. I saw a man on a sidewalk, barely able to stand, trying to get up one last time before suddenly collapsing while an ambulance was slow to arrive. I recognized him. I remembered humiliating him and throwing him away like trash. Now I felt what he felt. I heard every inner cry of pleading. I heard the silent question so many people ask when they believe they are completely alone. Why can't anyone save me? There was no way to look away because that truth was connected to my choice. Their pain now pierced my soul. Jesus looked at me, not with hatred, but with profound sadness. A sadness that reflected what I could have been and what I chose to become. Without moving his lips, without uttering an audible word, I heard within myself a phrase that shattered any defense I still held. You didn't just take lives, you took futures. Those words echoed as if they had been engraved on my soul. I understood that hell was not a punishment imposed by God, but the consequence of the path I myself had chosen to tread while destroying what God loved. The torment did not come from the light, but from the distance from it, because the real condemnation isn't being sent to hell, it's realizing you walked there on your own 2 feet. When those images faded, I felt as if I had been stripped bare before the most absolute truth. There were no more justifications, no more masks, no more pride. Only me, my guilt, and the presence of the one who saw everything without needing to ask anything. I thought that would be the end. I thought the next sensation would be the definitive fall into the void. But unexpectedly, the light surrounding me began to pulsate, as if breathing. It was then that I felt something touching what I can only describe as the essence of my being. It wasn't a hand, it was mercy. A mercy that could not be understood by someone who spent their life believing that love was weakness. Jesus didn't say I was forgiven, didn't say everything would be all right, didn't make promises. He simply gave me something I never asked for. He gave me a second chance. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital. A tube was down my throat. Machines were beeping incessantly, and I felt an enormous weight on my chest as if my body was being forcibly returned to me. A police officer was beside my bed, holding a clipboard with my name on it. I wanted to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. All I could manage were tears streaming down my face. At that moment, I realized that I had returned not to continue living the life I had before, but to abandon everything I had been. When I finally managed to speak, I asked to meet the families of the people I had hurt, including Noah's family. I didn't want to justify my choices. I wanted to confess. I gave away roots, names, deposits, contacts. I was called a traitor by the world that once applauded me, but it was the first time I was walking towards what was right. Redemption didn't come when I started breathing again, but when I chose to kneel before the truth. After everything I've been through, I've understood that death is not the end of existence, nor a line separating what we were from what we will be. Death is a spiritual mirror that reveals with the precision of a scalpel what has always been within us, but which we avoid seeing while wearing masks here on earth. I spent my life running from the idea of God, believing that faith was merely an emotional crutch for people incapable of facing reality. I used to say that everyone needed to take care of themselves and that no one had the right to interfere in my choices, especially God. Today I know that this discourse did not come from freedom, but from pride and spiritual blindness. I believed that God was an invention, that heaven and hell were myths created to manipulate the minds of the weak, and that, in the end, everything ended the same way: a body inside a coffin and oblivion soon after. However, when life slipped from my body and I stood before him, I realized that the true illusion wasn't believing in God. The true illusion was believing that my life had no consequences. At that moment, I understood that no one escapes the truth, because the truth doesn't depend on anyone's belief to exist. Death doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply reveals who you've become. It lays bare what you did with the time you had, with the choices you made, and with the opportunities you ignored. Before Jesus, I discovered that all the justifications I used for my mistakes and all the excuses I gave myself were too fragile to protect me from the reality of my soul. The life you live today is shaping the destiny of your eternity. Every thought you nurture, every choice you repeat, every action you take creates a path that leads you to light or darkness. There is no neutrality, because not choosing is already a choice. I used to say that I still had time to change, that one day I would regret it, that later I could adjust what was wrong with me, until I discovered that late regret doesn't exist on the other side. After death, there is no negotiation, no justification, no self-deception. There is only awareness. I returned because God allowed me to see that too. Warn people who may be as I once was, playing with their own eternity. No one deceives God. You can manipulate the whole world, but you will never be able to manipulate the truth. If this message resonated with you, please share it in the comments. I choose the light. And subscribe to the channel, because stories like this can reach people who are about to cross the line of no return. Don't put off until tomorrow what could save your soul today.